Hey class, today we'll be going over the death penalty and a couple of different ethical theories that have some opinions on this. So we'll go over kind of a consequentialist approach, where if we get the right results, then that's the kind of thing that we should be doing. And we'll go over a deontological approach, on the other hand, which is more of, is this the right action to take, whether or not the consequences are that desirable. So let's get into this. First, let's talk about the lex talionis. That's a fancy Latin word for you guys, or two Latin words for you guys to use to impress your friends and to intimidate your enemies. It literally means the law of retaliation. You see this talked about in Old Testament studies. When you see it there in the Torah, it says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So what this really means is that it's about proportion, that the punishment should fit the crime. So not necessarily that we should go, poke people's eyes out or knock people's teeth out, but that whatever punishment for whatever crime should be fairly proportional to that. So what does that mean? That's the big problem, I think. How are we going to say that a punishment does fit a crime? So if someone were to have their tooth knocked out, should we knock the other person's tooth out? Okay, maybe. But what about, bank fraud? What about identity theft or stealing someone's car or anything, insert other more abstract crime or some other kind of different crime? How do we steal the perpetrator's car? Do we steal their identity and ruin their credit? What do we do? So this question immediately, sounds on the surface like, hey, that's a pretty good idea. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And then it immediately is complicated, and the waters get pretty cloudy on that. So we don't really have a good working definition. I mean, I guess we do, and this gets into kind of the legal aspects of it as well as the philosophical. But I think just for kind of a functional definition, it should be, proportionality, that whatever crime there is, it should be proportional. The punishment should be proportional to it. So you're going to see this lex talionis approach much more in the deontological ethics. So deontology, another fancy word for you. This is means duty-based ethics. Deon is duty in Greek. So this is mainly if you were to put the good in, if you had three options for putting the good: the person, the action, or the result. The deontologist is going to say, well, it's going to go in the action. So actions are what are good and bad, not results or the person or what have you. We're going to focus more so on that action. So this view is that some acts are right in and of themselves, regardless of those consequences, and those consequences are morally irrelevant. So that means that let's say you cheat on a test, and you think, well, should I tell the truth? Or you mess up at work or something, I don't know. Insert whatever scenario here, but you have to tell the truth, and the truth is going to get you in trouble. So the deontologist is going to ask, well, the consequences may be negative for this, but I'm going to have to tell the truth anyway, because that will be the right thing to do, regardless of those consequences. So even though you may get, a bad grade, or you may get fired or what have you, the deontologist is going to say, no, you did the right thing. So they're much more likely to believe in absolutes. So some things are absolutely right, some things are absolutely wrong, and there's not much leeway on that. They're going to be pretty much sticklers on that kind of position. So what would they say about the death penalty? So they're not going to worry too much about deterrence. They're not going to worry too much about rehabilitation. They're mostly going to worry about whether or not the death penalty is a good thing or a bad thing in and of itself. So is it the right course of action? And I started thinking about some of the people who have been executed over the years. Stanley Williams, he was a gang member in California. This was back when you guys were wee little babies. In 2005, he had spent over a decade on death row and had written books, written children's books, and had really tried to show that he had reformed himself and he had done all these kinds of things to get people out of gang life. And still, he was executed for his crimes. He killed 2 unarmed people at a convenience store for no reason. And so he was still executed for that crime. And so, the thinking in his execution, this was all over the news, you can probably still find clips of it, was that, well, he still murdered 2 people in cold blood. He should be punished for that crime. And so the proportionality, that lex talionis, comes back into this, and the deontologist is saying, well, that was a justified action, even though he may have reformed himself now and maybe his actions are having good consequences now. That's irrelevant to the act that we're doing. So the deontologists would probably go more for say that this is a justified action here. Though some deontologists might not agree with the death penalty for a few different reasons. Some, the sanctity of life, that we shouldn't kill people for any reason or for very few reasons. Playing God, that it is not up to us, and we'll see some of this in the religious objections later on, that it is up to God who is going to number people's days, and that we should not interfere with that. Also, deontologists might disagree on what the role of the state and the power of the state may be, and also what the definition of justice may be. So they might not think that a death penalty is just, and that the state has no power or should have no power to do that. Another aspect of deontological ethics would probably be retributive justice. So this is seeking to right a wrong or balancing the scales or something along those lines. And the Kantian or other deontological approaches would say that by committing some kind of a crime, that you are forfeiting certain rights that you have, and that you should be punished for whatever crime you have. So, again, lex talionis, it's going to bring back that aspect of righting this wrong and paying you back for the crime that you have committed. So you'll see something like that in these approaches. And we should make this distinction between retribution and revenge. Revenge is when you personally go out and try to right that wrong yourself, vigilante style or whatever. That's personal. Retribution would be by the authorities. It is impersonal. It is the state that takes care of something like that. And so it's not something that the individual would try to do. It is the collective group. So, take our legal apparatus. If a crime is committed against me, I call the police, I tell them what happened, they arrest someone, and then the state punishes that person. I do not punish that person. So they give up certain rights within the state and within our society by committing some kind of a crime. So a deontologist could also appeal to this principle of retribution as well. Now, on the other hand, we have consequentialist approaches. Consequentialists might not be so much for the death penalty for a few different reasons. They're going to ask the question, does this get us to the place that we want to be? Is this action going to get us the right results? So, like I said earlier about those 3 places to put our good, you've got person, action, and result. The consequentialist is going to go with the consequences, the result. So they're going to say, okay, are the results of these policies, of these actions, of the death penalty getting us to the better society that we want? Then if the answer is yes, it's permissible. If it is not, then it is not permissible. It's not the right thing to do. So we've got kind of a change here between retribution and now to rehabilitation. So retribution, of course, is going to punish the crime, and that's about it. You do this, you get 40 lashes, you get 3 months in prison, whatever. It's retribution. It's just punishment. Rehabilitation, on the other hand, is seeking to punish for the crime, but also making someone fit to rejoin society. So we see in the United States that we do have kind of a both and approach to that, because we have the halfway houses, we have job programs, we have training. Here at this college, actually, we train prisoners in electrical trades and things like that. So we're trying to rehabilitate them to rejoin society, make them fit to rejoin that society and contribute to it, and no longer return to a life of crime or something like that. So the rehabilitative approach is going to say, yeah, we should remove these people from society, and we should then try to turn them into a better person. So if that is our approach, if we want a better society and we can make people into better people, then executing them is kind of precluded from that. Because once you kill someone, that's it. They're done. There's no rehabilitation. There's nothing that can be done after that. They can't be sorry for their crimes, or seek to make anything better. So keep that in mind with the consequentialist approach. For deterrence, we see both sides, the consequentialist and the deontologist, talk about deterrence. The deontologist is going to say, well, if the death penalty deters crime, then it's a good thing as well. And that's one of the things that should be done with it. But it really hasn't been shown to decrease crime that we know of. And it's pretty complicated, so I don't really know for sure. And our book is kind of old on it, and there's been all kinds of studies that conflict. But in general, what I've seen is that it doesn't really show to decrease crime. Of course, it does take that one criminal off the streets and out of society permanently. So yes, it does deter that person from committing future crimes. So does it achieve the goals that we set out? Maybe not. Not really sure. We've got a few other approaches. Immanuel Kant, he is a deontologist, and he was for the death penalty in his own day. He lived in the late 1700s, died in 1804 or 05. But his system could be argued that it could be against the death penalty. So he did say that if you commit certain crimes, then you do give up some of these rights. But he also has this universalizing approach that if you cannot universalize something, then it's no longer rational. If everybody can do it, then it's rational. But if we can't universalize it and make everyone do it, then it's irrational. So it's kind of this universalizing principle. So should we universalize the death penalty? Again, that gets problematic. What do we universalize it for? And all this other interesting detail. One part of Kant's philosophy is that our treatment of others is always an end in itself. We treat others as an end in themselves, never as a means to another end. So in one respect, he uses that himself to say that, well, when you murder someone, when you kill someone, you were treating them as a means to some other end, and so you have violated that person, and so you were justified in executing you. So you could also turn that around and say, well, are we treating that person who is being executed as an end in themselves, or have they given up that right? So there's probably some wiggle room in there with his system. You can also argue politically from his system that certain rights should be protected. One of those could be the right to life. I don't know. I'll have to review more literature on that, but Kant himself was for the death penalty and thought that the death penalty was something that was permissible by the state. The last thing is religious viewpoints. So we've got a couple of different points on this, and oftentimes we'll see, especially here in the United States, more conservative and or religious viewpoints will be generally, but not always, pro-death penalty, because that is something that the Bible, the Tanakh, the Quran, all mention the death penalty. So you've got, in the opening chapters of Genesis, whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, because in the image of God made he man. So it's saying if someone kills somebody, they should be executed for that. Well, there's a few dissenting religious viewpoints. This man on the screen here is Cardinal Bernardine, excuse me. He is, or was, a Catholic archbishop and known very much for his opposition to the death penalty. And he had a very interesting position. He said, well, maybe the death penalty in theory, yes, it's mentioned in the Bible, but look how sinful man is. Look how terrible man is. Look at how many innocent people we have found on death row, and who knows how many have been killed before that we just didn't find the evidence. So he thought that in the practice that it was not permissible. In theory, yes. He would probably say, yeah, we're all sinners. We all deserve death. But in practice, no, because the state is flawed, people are flawed, and that we cannot have that kind of system and work it effectively. He would also say that the death is permanent, and that when someone is executed, that precludes any chance of them repenting, and then they have no chance to say that they were sorry after that. We're all made in the image of God, according to Christians, and so if that is the case, then should we be killing others? So those are all things that Cardinal Bernardine brings into this. Another position is that, and this might be more of an Anabaptist position, that Christ proclaims the end of violence, that Christ was violently killed, and then he conquered death and conquered violence by his resurrection. And so Christians are called to a life of nonviolence. And we do see this in the early days of Christianity. They did not participate in the revolt against Rome in 66 through 70 AD. They oftentimes were pacifists in the Roman Empire, would not join the army or fight or anything like that. So we do see some of that in the Christian tradition throughout history. But then, of course, we see the other side of that the scriptures do mention the death penalty, and so you've got these different theological approaches, and you'll just have to see which one you think fits best if you are one of these part of one of these religious groups. So, last things, our conclusion here is there is some common ground, but the death penalty. It cannot rehabilitate criminals, and it does not seem to deter other crimes, though perhaps it does. I don't know. I'm not sure what the statistics say today. There are some serious objections, such as malpractice, false convictions, things like that. There's also a long history on the other side of good arguments. We've got the retribution argument. We've got lex talionis, that punishment should fit the crime. And we've got a long tradition in most of the religions of the world for the death penalty. So I think the common ground between both of these positions is that both sides want to see a decrease in crime. Both sides want to see less people executed. The people who are for the death penalty are not like, hey, let's go kill people. No, they see it as one of these things that is bad, but not wrong, and may even be required of us. It may even be our duty to do that, either because of religious reasons or from an ethical standpoint of deontology or something like that. So at the end of the day, review the readings, review the literature, think about it deeply, and ask yourself what answers the most questions and what has the least amount of problems. And figure that out and hold to that position and see if it's consistent with your other beliefs.